Good evening. I'm Renee Powell with Oklahoma Family Network, and welcome to Toolbox Tuesday. Tonight, we are so fortunate to have Caleb Price from the Oklahoma State University, OSU, share about strong dads and the importance of fatherly involvement. Caleb Price is a PhD student in the Department of Human Development and Family Science at Oklahoma State University. His research focuses on family communication and fatherhood. For the past 2.5 years, he has worked as a research assistant for Strong Dads and taught co-parenting for resilience programs for divorcing parents. Caleb and his wife are parents to one daughter and are expecting another baby girl in March. So, congratulations, Caleb, and we're so glad that you're here. And I, again, just thank you for being here. And I am going to turn my audio off and let you get started. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So as she mentioned, I moved out to Oklahoma 2.5 years ago to be a research assistant. A great opportunity for this new program that was starting up to help dads to be more involved with their kids. And then along that journey, I became a father myself. We had our first baby girl back in April of last year, and now we're expecting a second baby girl in March. So something that's been personally, a journey. It's something I've learned a lot about in my own life, but also something from a research perspective as a researcher, learning more about, fathers, the experiences they go through and the importance that they can have in their kids' lives. So that's kind of what I'm going to be sharing a little bit about today is mostly the research behind that. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and get this presentation going, if it'll let me. There we go. So first off, invite everyone just to kind of to take a minute to think about what are your preconceived ideas about fathers and dads? What do you think about when you hear fathers or dads? Do you reflect on your own father? Is he kind of your example of what dads should be like? Do you think about what you've seen in other men? Do you think about what you've seen on TV? Just invite you all to take a minute to kind of think about that. What comes to mind when you think about fathers? And think about, is this similar to what other people think, in our society in America? Or do you think that other people may have different ideas? And I don't know how interactive we want this to be, Renee, but I'm open to, having some back and forth between us if you'd
Oh
like.
yeah, no, we can. This is very informal, and
Okay.
interaction is highly encouraged.
Okay, great. So yeah, maybe let's hear from a couple people then to answer these questions. When you hear fathers, what comes to mind? And if you think about what your thoughts are similar to other folks.
I guess when you just say father, and my thoughts about fathers, I kind of process that. I first think of, my dad. I think of my husband, but then, given that we're parents of kids with a special healthcare need or a disability, I kind of, when I think of dads, I imagine, just how my husband processed, the diagnosis of my first son with hearing loss so differently than I did. And now I have a 10 and 14-year-old boy. I have two boys, but I'm just seeing how his role has changed in their lives. He's the one that does like Star Wars with them. He's the one that does, they do they work in the garage on like wires and things like that, like wiring things. So it's just been an interesting experience. I'm not a father, but just, thinking of how dads and hearing about how other fathers process the diagnosis of their loved ones with a special healthcare need or disability is just one thing that pops into my mind just from experience.
Okay, that's great. Maybe one other person could share their thoughts.
I can share my
Um, mhm.
um When I think about fathers and dads, it's like a whole slew of things that kind of crawl into my mind because you have so many different cultures. I think about my dad, and I also think about like my brothers and the type of dads that they are. And they actually work in the field with developmental disabilities and people with disabilities and so forth. And I think about the way that they step through life and the way that they see things versus some of their friends or just extended family, and a lot of it is very different. Um, and when we're able to have that open dialogue and share um, lived experiences or things that we've learned, just the growth. I mean, it's a lot, right? So there's a lot that's people are uneducated about, and just having the floor to share those things, I think it's a great thing because we're all always learning, right? The learning never stops. It is continuous. So I like that you asked that question because there's so many things that starts to creep up into our brains, even with our coworkers as we learn and grow those work families too with what we see, the way that they step through life. It's just a lot different. So I can appreciate the diversity and the learning and being intentional about learning and intentional about sharing things, because it's endless information that can just constantly keep coming.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I appreciate both of your perspectives. It sounds like both of you are kind of drawing on your personal experiences, and I think that's natural for us to do as people, even as researchers. So me and myself, I actually have a similar situation where two of my three siblings are totally blind from a genetic condition, and my dad as well, after he had two children who were blind, he changed career paths, and now he's been working with blind students throughout the state of Utah for, 20 plus years, and that's been his career path that he's changed because of, our family situation. So that's something I can relate to as well, something that he took head on. But of course, the point here is that, not everyone has the same kind of experiences with fathers in their lives. And so we're kind of going to touch a little bit on that and talk about kind of some of the historical things too. So historically, as you know, we're not surprised that, dads are kind of seen as a paycheck in a lot of ways. Their primary role was to be a financial provider. Um, and so even if you look at, again, I'm in human development and family science where we do research about families. And historically, there wasn't hardly any research about dads to begin with, because the idea was that, moms are the ones at home taking care of the kids. Moms are the ones interacting with the babies and the little ones. So what's the point of researching dads? We don't really need to learn about what makes a good dad because what makes a good dad is the paycheck, right? That's what, how these things were viewed. And actually, when the government first started to implement programs for fathers, the very first programs were only targeted at increasing child support, right? Again, kind of insinuating that the value that a father has in his kids' lives is the financial, right? And of course, that's changed over time. But it's really only since the early 2000s that we've started to have programs that have been targeted at actually dads being more in, spending time with their kids, like that's something important. And so the research is crystal clear in backing this up that there are a whole lot of benefits that kids get when dads are involved in their lives. And so these stats here, it's not as if we're saying, if your dad is involved in your life, that automatically everything is going to go great. Or if your dad is not involved, then you're doomed. It's nothing like that. But we're just talking about big picture here with research. So this is averages, right? So on average, when dads are involved in their kids' lives, you see all these benefits that they get. They get better grades in school on average. They're more likely to go to college, more likely to get a good paying job. You see these kind of social things too. They have more confidence. They are able to have more friends at school, have better mental and physical health. And I think you can kind of reflect a little bit and see, having that um, male figure, that male role model in your life can be a positive thing. And if it's missing, then people tend to seek that out in other ways. So you see these delinquent behaviors and incarceration rates that are higher with people who don't have their fathers involved in their life. And again, if you don't have that father, that male role model for young men, they're going to be looking for that in some other way, and that might be in places that aren't great, you know. Like you traditionally you might think about gangs or something like that. Whereas for um, young women, again, they're looking for that and they might seek out romantic relationships earlier than might be appropriate. And so, um, again, teenage pregnancy rates are higher in with girls whose dads are not involved in their lives. Um, and interestingly, there's even a biological component to this where there's been research that showed that girls whose dads aren't involved with their life, they actually go through puberty sooner, right? There's even that biological change where their body is signaling to them, right, that they want to have, you know, this sort of relationship, right? Um, so we're gonna, you know, there's some pretty clear benefits that have been well established in the research that, you know, kids benefit when their dads are involved in their life. So we're gonna um, talk a little bit about why that is. Um, but before we get into that, does anybody just have any thoughts on why do you think having a father involved in your life would, you know, have all these benefits associated with it? Kind of just thoughts that you might have.
Hello, Caleb. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Sekou Clancy, everyone. I'm the program manager for Fatherhood Today at the Parent Child Center of Tulsa. And so, to speak to this particular question, you know, your kids or any children, they need those fathers in their lives, particularly for these reasons. Um, you know, the moral compass, the guide, the teacher, the mentor. You know, whenever you have that dad present, and they're involved in the kids' lives, they have something to look up to. And so, lots of questions that takes place along what we call the life course. So as kids come out as infants and they start going through different developmental stages and hitting certain milestones, they're going to be curious and have questions and they're going to make mistakes. And that dad is instrumental if he's involved in helping shape and mold and guide them along the way throughout that life course, particularly once they become adults. The ideal is to teach and guide them and create avenue and an environment so they can gain some sort of autonomy and independence. And so anytime we have that dad present and he's clear on his role, that whole process happens a little more easier. So again, it's just the dad is there as that teach and guide, the protector. Of course, he helps with the finances where needed as well. But you know, if that the biological isn't there, we can always look at a father figure. So I'm in a classroom today with several dads, and they're kind of shy right now. I wanted them to chime in on your initial question, but some of them didn't want to answer it. I guess they're camera shy. So that would be my answer. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your insights there. So one of the things that Sekou said is that, you know, if dads are involved as this mentor and teacher, it just makes things a little bit easier. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. Just because if you think about it, as people, we just want support in our lives. We benefit from support. If you have help from a lot of people, you're going to do better. So if your dad especially is a champion for you, if he's going to be that mentor and teacher, you just have a little bit of extra support, like he's saying, that just make things go a little bit more smoothly. And so to kind of build on that, Seiko also mentioned like developmental stages. And so there may be some things that dads just naturally do a little bit differently that can actually help foster child development. So if you think about it, um, you think about dads interacting with children, you often see this rough and tumble type play. That's something that just comes very naturally to a lot of men, right? So with my daughter, I like to, you know, she's a year and a half. I like to hold her upside down, fling her around. We do steamroller. I kind of hug her tight, and she's asked for it a couple times. Like she enjoys this, right? This is something that kids naturally like to do, something dads, uncles, brothers just kind of naturally do, right? Where you're, you know, wrestling and doing this kind of crazy play. And sometimes yeah, you probably might not think about it, but this can actually be good for ch children's development, right? There's some research showing that this rough and tumble play can help kids, right? It helps them learn, for example, how I can have fun interacting with somebody without pushing too far. If I'm going too far and my daughter suddenly doesn't like what I'm doing, if I'm being a little bit too rough, she can say, "Hey, wait a second, Dad. That's a little bit too rough. I'm having fun, but let's slow down, right? I'm learning how to set limits, right? I'm learning how to interact with one another. Pretty similarly, dads are more likely to play in unpredictable ways, be a little bit crazy, pop out and scare you kind of a thing, and tease, right? Again, this is something like maybe we get eye rolls sometimes because we have dads with their dads joke and poking fun at their kids. But again, this is something that can actually help foster emotion regulation because if you go out into the world, things aren't always going to go as you expect, right? you know? And so you're having these unpredictable things. And the way I think about it is this teasing is almost like rough and tumble play with words, right? It's kind of this thing where you're learning to interact socially with people and learn like, I'm okay, we're still having fun and kind of finding that balance with things, right? So another thing is if you think about risk taking, I'm gonna guess if I mean this again, this isn't gonna be true for everyone, but I'm gonna guess if you think about how often did your mom encourage you to go out and do something crazy, right? Probably not super often. My dad, I'm from a place with snow. My dad taught us how to you can hold on to the back of a car when it's snowing, you can just get pulled down the road. We call that hooky bobbing, right? My mom was never gonna teach me that, right? That's something that dads do a lot of the time. And so even with my daughter at the park, I'm always just have this natural urge to push her to do more, to climb higher, to kind of push these limits. This isn't going to be true for all dads or true for all moms, but on average, this is something that dads naturally just do, that they want to push their kids to take a few risks to grow because that's just an important part of life too. You're not going to be able to learn to run if you haven't learned how to walk. You haven't going to learn how to ride a bike if you're not fallen down a few times, right? This is kind of the way that it's framed a lot of the time is that and again, there's differences across people, but on average, moms are going to be, all right, come here, I'm going to comfort you when things are hard and tough. And dads are going to say, let's prepare you for what's out there in the world. Let's push you to explore, let's push you to grow. And that's kind of the natural instinct that a lot of men and fathers have. So the point here is that like I mentioned, not everybody is going to be exactly like that. Some moms might encourage risk taking. Not all dads might do this rough and tumble play. But the point here, like we said earlier, is that the research is crystal clear that father involvement benefits kids. So no matter what your style is, if whatever your interests are, maybe if you're not into sports, if you're into other types of things, still sharing those activities with your kids, still infusing your own personality into whatever you're doing with your kids is going to be huge and important for them. And even um, if you think about dads who aren't able to see their kids, for example, they don't have custody, they're separated. Even dads writing letters, FaceTiming, just staying in contact with that. There's research that shows that even that has benefits for kids as well, right? So even if you're not able to have that face-to-face interaction that you'd like, even just trying to maintain contact and be involved in some sort of way, we see that there's benefits from that too. And so, yeah, if as dads not being afraid to play to what comes to us naturally, what our strengths are, and to lean into that and to realize that these things can actually have, developmental benefits for kids. And the other part of it too is, like I mentioned previously, government programs were all about getting dads to pay child support, right? And a lot of the times there's not a reflection on, well, what about the man himself? How is the man himself doing? How is men doing mentally? How's their emotional health, right? And we see that when dads are involved in their kids' lives, probably not surprising, but it's good for them too, right? I don't know for other people, but my personal experience is when I was working full time as a single man, I was not that happy because it didn't feel like I was doing something super meaningful. I was just making money for myself, which was fine, and I needed to do that, but it didn't have the same meaning that now, where I have my wife and I have a daughter where I feel like my work is a lot more meaningful because, I have some people that are relying on me, and that's important for men often to have that sense of purpose and meaning. Um, and even physical benefits, you see that. And again, you're motivated to take care of yourself. You want to be there for your kids. So men who are involved in their kids' lives tend to actually live longer and have better physical health, right? If you have issues in your life, if you have problems with drugs and alcohol, if you have, problems finding a job, you have troubles with money, again, if you're involved with your kid's life, there's that giant motivator right there that's helping you to take care of all these things and do the best that you can, right? And it's not always going to go perfectly, but you have that motivation there, right? That gives you that sense of purpose and meaning. So one thing that I kind of touched on earlier that we're gonna talk a little bit about is, you know, one thing I want us to reflect on throughout this presentation is, what could I do either as a father or as a person in a community or organization to encourage fathers to be involved, right? Because there's this gap, right? If you ask dads, is it important to you that you're a dad? Is that an important part of who you are, your identity? Almost every single father out there, about 99% are going to say, yeah, it's really, really important to me. It's a huge part of who I am that I'm a father. That's like a core part of my identity. But then there's this gap where we know that not all dads are involved, right? So you see that there's, about a quarter of children in America live without any father figure, and that percentage is going to be higher for biological, there's more children who, don't live with their biological father than just that 25%. And then, of course, then there's dads who may live with their kids but aren't really there. They might be kind of checked out, right? And not, even though that they're with their kids, they might not be as involved. So there's kind of this gap where you ask dads, um, yes, it's important for me to be a dad, but why aren't you being involved if it's so important to you? There's kind of this question, right? So there can be all sorts of reasons that dads might not be involved with their kids. One of them is, again, I teach a class for divorcing parents as well. It could be the relationship with the mother a lot of the time. If the relationship with the mother isn't so great, then there's kind of this barrier that sometimes happens where, the mom will prevent, dad from being involved. And sometimes there can be good reasons for that. Like if the father isn't safe for their kids, but a lot of the time, that isn't always the case too. And we see that most of the time, even though it's changing over time, the courts tend to award custody to moms more on average. And so sometimes they can be prevented from seeing their kids. So that's one reason that could be. It could be shame or guilt. It could be that, for example, when a father was younger, he wasn't as involved as he would have liked to be. And now that he's older and wants to be involved, he might experience this shame and guilt that because I wasn't there before, I don't feel like I can be now. It could be a lack of confidence. And this is maybe something that isn't talked about as much because you don't see men just sitting around chatting about fatherhood. Maybe you might, when you have programs like this, but if you go out in the community, dads aren't just out there talking to each other about what it's like to be the dad. That doesn't happen very often, right? And so a lot of men don't feel confident that what they're doing is right, if that makes sense. They're not sure that, the way dads are has changed over time, and they might not necessarily feel confident that what they're doing is right, or they feel like they can't make a difference. Um, People have done studies on TV shows, and there's a lot of messaging in TV shows that, dads are often the comic relief in TV shows. They're kind of the butt of the joke a lot of the time. And they're not shown in TV shows. Sekou mentioned earlier, he mentioned like being a teacher and a mentor, right? And that does happen in some shows and movies, but a lot of the time researchers actually show that that's been declining, or they show fathers acting in a mentor in a teaching role. And there is one study that actually showed that basically the more TV you watched, the less you believed that dads were important for their kids. There's kind of this, again, this subtle messaging that can come in sometimes, right? So there's this lack of confidence where if you ask men out there, ask dads out there, actually about half of men will say that they're replaceable, right? So there's this belief that other men could step in or other, the mom could step in and they could fill that role, and I'm not necessarily that important, right? It hasn't sunken through to all men out there that might need encouragement. It hasn't sunken through that they can make this difference and convey these benefits that we talked about earlier. Again, kind of similar to what we talked about, this lack of encouragement and social support. Um, Again, not a lot of conversations among men with other men about their experiences, dads, not a lot of positive messaging all the time towards fathers to be encouraged. And again, these community programs, we're starting to see some community programs, government programs encouraging fathers, but a lot less than you might see for other groups. And again, we talked about the importance of work responsibilities, financial struggles. So if I can't, either I'm working all the time, right? I'm working a lot of hours to provide. So it's just hard to spend time with my kids if I'm working 40 hours, 60 hours, however many hours to try to provide. Or if I'm not making enough money to provide, then I might not feel like I can be as involved as I want to because, I might not feel worthy or feel like I'm providing in the way that I should be. And then obviously you have these other issues too, like being incarcerated or having addictions, or as we talked about, the tendency to again award custody to another. So there's a whole range of experiences, and that's something we touched on earlier. Your comment that again, not everybody has the same experience. So if our goal is to increase father involvement, being aware of the range of experiences that are out there, that um, there's dads who a might want to be involved but have barriers, or dads that just lack the confidence, or you know, just pointing out that there's a range of experiences that fathers have. So then thinking about again, if we want dads to be more involved, well, what can we do? And again, there's research that shows that really encouragement from all sorts of different places can help dads be involved. If dads haven't received any encouraging messages about it, then almost any encouraging message is going to be beneficial. It's going to say, I can step up, I can do this. There's not a lot of men that have actually heard that, like that you as a father are important, you can make a difference. That's just again not something a message that you hear very often that people are naturally saying and coming out of their mouths super often. Um, so sending that message that dads are important for their children's development as we talked about, right? So I wanted to touch on one program that we did, and unfortunately, as Renee knows, unfortunately, this program has been put on indefinite pause. Looks like it probably will not get up and going due to funding issues again. Um, but this is one effort that the one that I've been involved with in researching is that in 2023, Oklahoma Human Services launched this program called Strong Dads, which was in 9 different counties throughout Oklahoma, offered classes in English and Spanish. And so, again, the goal of this program was to increase father involvement. But at the same time, there is also this idea of dads connecting to one another and to their community. So kind of as I've been touching on earlier, a lot of dads don't have these big friend networks, a lot of big support systems. So having dads be able to come together and talk about being a father is something that can be really beneficial and something that not necessarily a lot of dads have. They also had this, of course, they'd have this content that dads would go through about self-awareness, about parenting skills, about communication, about relationship skills, and this kind of thing. Um, and so we'll touch on just a little bit of what dads who went through the program said that kind of um, gives you an idea of kind of the typical benefits that you might have seen. Um, so the first one said, I'm a private person. I like to stay to myself. And so before the program, I didn't have any guys that I could even talk to, even if I wanted to. the class helped a lot to be able to find guys to actually talk to again, to have some brothers and to talk about problems with. Yeah. So, I mean, even myself, if I'm being honest, and it's the tendency of a lot of men to just rely on their wife or romantic partner to talk about things with. And a lot of men don't have um, other fathers to talk through things with. They don't have a lot of men that they share things with. And what we found is that this is a really powerful experience, right? This is a lot of the powerful experience for a lot of men just to be able to connect with one another, talk about things that matter a little bit more deeply. It's great to talk about sports or whatever's going on with other guys, but then there can be a power in realizing that I'm not alone. I'm actually, as a father, I'm going through similar things as other dads. Um, there, I might be able to learn from more experienced dads who've gone through more things that can provide some support and some advice. And we see that when dads are been able to connect through this program, that many of them continue these relationships even beyond where they're helping one another. Um, there's an example of somebody who got their truck stuck, and these guys responded and helped them get their truck out and things like that. So being more connected to their community. And then kind of the second thing to touch on is the relationship with their kids. So this other dad said, before I always felt closed off, shut off, that I couldn't talk to my kids about certain things. But knowing there's different ways to talk to them and not just talk, listen to them and get to know how they're doing. It's been an eye opener, and I think that's the best thing now is having a relationship with my children. It's crazy to see how much I'd been missing out on. So from this program, what we've done so far, those are probably the two biggest things, just men connecting with other men, having that camaraderie, that community, strengthening one another as brothers, like that guy mentioned. And then also just especially if you haven't had a role model as a father, um, that's going to be a lot of people, where their dad isn't isn't going to be talking to them about certain things, right? There's not a lot of this emotional kind of stuff with even with my father, right? He's going to be 60, and you think about people, older dads as well, that this kind of thing just was not modeled for us, right? We want dads to we're asking dads to be emotionally involved with their kids, but they haven't had any role models of that a lot of the time, right? And so, learning that that's something you can do, learning that that's okay, learning that that can benefit your kids, right? That, you can have these kind of emotional conversations with your children and connect with them, and just the benefit that you can have in their lives from these kinds of things. So those are probably the two biggest things. So for a minute, I just wanted to again, I know I've been talking for a while, kind of getting a little rambly here. So I'll turn it back to you, whether you yourself are a father or reflecting on you at whatever your role is, thinking, what could I do to promote father involvement? I'll let a couple of y'all maybe share your thoughts on that.
Hey Caleb, I was just trying to convince some of the dads here to come on board and talk. Everybody's shy today. I just don't believe they talked me to death. And then when I said, okay, come on in, everything. So, what can we do? Personally, I just believe that for all dads, as you all know, your kids are everything, and just being there. Although, you might raise the kids up and they're grown and all that good stuff, they're gonna always come back and want something from their father, whether it's security advice or just some type of support. But if that kid is not grown, of course, and they're still in that household, it's about being present and just being available. And so, with regard to men having a safe space to be vulnerable, now that's a tricky situation because if you grew up in a household and your father or father figure didn't show any signs of vulnerability, the likelihood of you doing the opposite is slim to none. But I always say anyone can change once they are aware of what that particular change should look like. And we want to model that. So, baby steps to getting there, being vulnerable, creating a safe space. One of the debates that we have in the Fatherhood Today program is about with boys. Uh, Do we tell them to suck it up when they fall down? Or do we go over there and say it's okay to cry? So we've had mixed feelings, over this whole thing about creating a space for guys or boys to cry. And so me growing up, there was no such thing as you could cry. You had to suck it up.
Let her cut
Yeah,
and roll on.
exactly, exactly. So I would say that's been one of the struggles. Not, how do you create that space? For girls, it's simple. You just, oh, baby, it'll be all right. Let me kiss it. Daddy makes it better. Boys, on the other hand, we still have this thing about they just have to be tough. So if they're being tough, okay, and being socialized from day one up until, we'll just say 25, they decide to, get involved in a romantic relationship. Okay, so how do they be vulnerable? Okay, so it's going to be some issues there. Are we raising our children to be good husbands? Are we raising our children, namely boys, to be good fathers? So we have to examine some of those things, and these are some of the conversations that we have in the Fatherhood Today program to look at where we are and where we want to go. And it's not always easy. It's very difficult and very complex to look at all this stuff. Now, I raised girls, so it's a different operation. I didn't have to worry about being tough. And that whole thing about risk, yeah, I took a whole lot of risks because I put them in traffic when it was time to learn to drive. And so we started out in a parking lot, graduated to side streets. From the side streets, we start taking on the highway. And so you're talking about, you're trying to teach some teens get in the highway, two different personalities. They like one is on one side, um, she's more outgoing, the other one's the total opposite. And so, they respond differently to the stimuli in traffic. And in certain cases, I thought we were going to get hit. But my point was, because one of them didn't want to stop at the light. It was like she's in the middle of the intersection before she stops. So the risk was there, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. I felt like it was necessary because, as you had mentioned, Caleb, there are going to be some times in life where we got to prepare you. You're not going to always have the luxury to get things rehearsed and put together neatly. You're going to have to get out there and improvise and deal with some situations and be quick on your feet. So men bring all that to the table as well. But to sum it all up, personally, I believe dads just need to be present and be there, regardless of what stage their children are in and all that good stuff. From a program perspective, my role is to make sure I bring dads in who may feel hopeless, feel like they're alone, who may not know where to go and what resources out there, and make sure we get those things taken care of. And so, whatever it is that I do not know, it's always good and refreshing to have people around our Fatherhood Coalition who may know, who may be able to assist with some particular resource or some knowledge that I may lack here. So that's always encouraging. So those are my thoughts about this reflection question.
Hey, I want to ask Caleb.
Oh yeah. Oh, one-on-one speak. Caleb, come on around. Danny, come on around, Danny. Caleb, here's Danny.
Danny, good to meet
Hey,
you,
Caleb, I
sir.
got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
When I was younger, I lost my dad when I was 10 or 11, and I really haven't had a role model since then. I'm 30 now. So I have 4 kids and one on the way. I don't get to see them. They're in foster care. I'm trying to get them back and everything. And I'm trying to figure out how to be a better dad towards them when I didn't have a dad really teach me because I lost him at a young age.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean that's a great question. I don't have probably the perfect answer for you, but I think what I'd say is a couple things. Once, Sekou mentioned that, we haven't necessarily had dads in the past who, talked about emotions and that kind of thing. And it was the same for me. It's kind of the same messaging of like, I'm always going to be tough. So I didn't have that modeled for me, but and hearing messages from others and seeking out, even reading things about, you know, what is good for kids, for example. That's something, we have Google, so and you're not always going to get the best information, but striving to look what is good for kids. And then second, um, you mentioned that you're not able to have, that direct contact with your kids necessarily because they're in foster care. So, like I mentioned earlier, well, what can you do, right? Can you can you call them up on the phone? Can you write them a letter? Can you send them a text message or anything like that?
No, I can't call them on the phone. Even if I tried, they wouldn't even let me talk to them if I tried. I'm
Yeah.
in I'm in Tulsa. I'm originally from McAllister. So I'm trying to figure out a way to get back down there. I was getting to see them like every other Monday, but since I didn't have a place to stay there, I had to come up here, and it's been rough. It's
Yeah, yeah,
been having no one to talk to about it. It's been a struggle.
yeah. No, that's super tough for sure. And so again, I don't know all your situation perfectly, and hopefully, there's people there that can support you. But what I would say is, um, thinking about, maybe you aren't able to have that contact with them right now, but just doing whatever you can to try to be able to do that. Because if you think about 5 years down the road, and these kids come to you and they say, why weren't you able to talk to me? You could say, well, there were all these things, but I was trying. I was doing my best. I was trying to, whatever it is, whatever you're trying to do, you can look at them in the face and tell them honestly, I was doing everything I could, because I wanted to have you. I wanted to be involved with your lives, right? So whatever steps those are, and maybe, Seiko or whoever's there can help you with what those steps are. But taking whatever those steps are so that you can look your kids in the face down the road and say, I was doing everything I could to be involved in your lives, if that makes sense.
It does. It really does.
We're on the
Yeah.
path now. That's
It's just been really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it
My
sounds like it.
wife, she got a mentor, and for like you said, women usually get the kids and the battle in DHS. There's more stuff for women out there than there are for men.
Yep. But like I said, there's starting to be those resources for men a little bit. And it sounds like you may have found a group there. So just taking
Oh
advantage
yeah,
of
yeah.
of
Oh,
whatever
I'm
we
going.
do have and can find.
good. Good.
I appreciate that. I wonder if maybe we could hear from one of the women too of their thoughts on this question.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody chime in on that.
Well, I guess if no one else wants to give the mom, female perspective, just what can we do to encourage and raise up fathers? I think from my standpoint, I'm always looking for resources for families across the state of Oklahoma for, parents of kids with some type of special healthcare disability or another. But honestly, a father is a father is a father, and I I I would love to do more, but I mean, um, just giving props to all the dads that I know and for how hard they're working just as people and for being just good dads in general. But I don't, I mean, my father has passed on, but, you know, just, he was such a better father than my dad's dad had issues with alcohol. Um, and it was almost like my dad was like given that he had such a bad experience, he didn't have his dad, but he had his grandpa who
Hmm.
again rose them up. So I really am grateful to his grandpa, but just encouraging men to seek connections to other men. That's about the one thing I can do, I guess. I don't know that's my take on it for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. Well, I think there's just some great thoughts. Miss Hannah, I see you have your hand raised too.
Yeah. I want to kind of just share like from personal experience, I guess. Because my mom passed away when I was very young, so I was with my dad growing up. And even though my dad was very present, he still wasn't present. Um, but I did have the opportunity to have plenty of uncles that were in my life that were able to guide me towards certain things and teach me certain things. So that was a plus for me. But as I fast forward to like my adult life and having two children of my own who both of their dads were incarcerated, and I didn't do a really good job at keeping them in their lives, but I did not keep them away on purpose. Just life is life in single mom, just trying to work and kind of make it. But in my current relationship now, I've been with my husband for going on 7 years now. And early on, um, one of the things that we did not get clarification on was parenting and how we would parent our children. Because he had kids and I had kids, and it caused issues early on in our relationship. Um, and some of the things that I have discovered, and there's strength in being vulnerable. And I tell my husband that all the time because he's just not transparent in that area. Um, I had to apologize to him at one point and say, all of those things that you wanted to do that I kept putting up blockers for, and that's those discipline areas and the things that the man is supposed to do. Because at this point, like my children, even though my daughter, one of them is 22 and the other one is 18, I feel like they really don't know what it feels like to have a dad, like somebody that's really going to protect them and to keep a roof over their head and to guide them in the right way. So even now in my adult life, I had to apologize to that I didn't allow that. And I had to also say I didn't allow that in a malicious type way. I just didn't allow it in from a place of trying to protect them to because what I thought was super rude or whatnot, I've come to learn that it's just you being strict and creating that structure for them and that guidance to mold them because we're not always going to be here. And we're not always going to have that security net. And even now, we still have a little bit of those issues, but we're more open to talk about it and each other not get offended. And to another point, my husband would always say, I just didn't grow up like that. And that's when we talk a little bit about the cultures. He said, I just grew up, all the women were in the kitchen. I grew up with my grandpa, and this and that and this and that. And I would always say, I understand that. But somebody earlier said you don't know what you don't know, right? And
Hmm.
support looks different for everybody. And we have to be okay with hearing it and listening, not just listening to respond, but to understand where the other one is coming from as we continue to grow. And we have to be able to do that in order to grow together. So there are things, so when I'm able to get that knowledge and have a real productive conversation with him, I am always sharing it with somebody that I feels that need it. Um, and even if it's just a little mustard seed that I'm dropping with, I'm gonna say the next woman, because sometimes women can be malicious in certain areas of their life, even if they're upset about the relationship failed or just whatever. I try to share those things because we use the children sometimes as pawns, and that's not okay. So I'm always sharing those things every time I'm able to.
Yeah. So I appreciate, all those insights that you all shared. And I think one thing to point out is that, me and Renee were talking before this, and she mentioned that, parenting doesn't come with a handbook, right? And there's a lot of complex situations and tough things come out, but it's a process, and it sounds like, Hannah was able to grow and, make some changes and be able to, um, step back, have those conversations and grow. And, I think that that's something that we all can do. Renee mentioned, encouraging people, providing resources. Again, that's trying to foster this growth. And as men, also taking it upon ourselves to do what we can to improve whatever that looks like. You mentioned, not having a role model and things like that. Same thing with, my grandfather also had problems with alcohol, was in prison. So my dad had a very rough upbringing, right? Where his dad wasn't always there, had problems with alcohol and these kinds of things. But, my dad took it upon himself to change, and to do things a little bit differently. And I am very appreciative of, um, those changes that he made where he provided for us and he was there. And then, of course, now I look at my dad and there, there's things like, oh, I wish he would have done that a little bit differently. I wish he would have been a little bit better in these areas. Right. But now I take it upon myself where, as a father, I see there's things that I can work on too. Right. I have a little daughter. I can work on being more patient with her, right? I can work on, we've talked about being emotionally vulnerable. I do this for a living. I talk to people about it. I do research on it, and still it's hard for me a lot of the time to be emotionally vulnerable, right? It's still hard to do these things. I'm still learning. I'm still practicing. Had conversation about it with my wife last night, right? It's still something that we can all work on and do whatever we have in our power, right? So I think really great thoughts from all of you. So maybe some things for organizations. I know some of you are involved with organizations. And things that you may or may not have even thought about. Like, are my organizations what they call father friendly, which, probably something we haven't thought about very much. If your organization serves families, are there pictures of dads in the room? Are there, we know when I've been traveling, we've been doing quite a bit of traveling lately. And a lot of the times the men's bathroom doesn't have a changing table, right? But the women's bathroom will. So that's kind of
She
sending
does.
again this subtle message, right? Who's supposed to take care of kids and that kind of thing. So if you're serving families, does the men's restroom have a changing table? If you're meeting
I've
with
been
men, are
some
you
had that
seeking their
families.
input, right? Or are you just referring? Sometimes you'll hear, people will naturally just say, "Oh, I know all the moms out there," right? And again, this exclusion thing, training staff to be aware. I know, again, I don't know necessarily all the organizations you work with, but one example I know is one of my colleagues went to parent-teacher conferences and the teacher just did not even acknowledge that he was there, just talked directly to the mom, right, the whole time, as if, his input wasn't valuable. So seeking dad's input if you're working with families, scheduling, making that priority to if you're scheduling a meeting or scheduling resources when dad is available to come to, then you're sending that message that dads are important, right? And that they can make a difference in their kids' lives. So kind of maybe some more subtle things and some things for organizations just to think about, right? And these things and encouraging dads, right? So I think we've heard some great things from all of you, and then just kind of last takeaway again for people on maybe what you could do for either the fathers in your lives or people that you come across in the community or something like that. Just to use message that's positive, supportive. Again, a lot of these dads have not had any encouragement at all whatsoever or any messages that what they do is important. Believe it or not, they just have not heard that at all. So thinking about as something as simple like I've noticed how much Jack loves playing video games with you, and I know it means a lot that you took the time to do that. Or whatever the dad's strength is, noticing that and pointing it out to them, sending the message that we need you, that you're important, right? Um, and so again, yeah, just kind of closing on that last reflection point for you. And as men, right? We can stand to mentor and benefit and just strengthen and support other men as well in their journey. So just reflecting on what you could do to support those other men or fathers in your either your family or your community. Um, so that's the last thing I had. Um, Appreciate your time. Looks like I've gone a little long, but
Would anybody else like to say anything, make any statements or questions while we have Caleb here? Or, we have Seiku's group. Um,
Anybody? I was asking one of the guys if they want to get up here. We already heard from one of them. We have several other in here. Looks like everyone is shy today. But I would just say, great job, Caleb. I wish you well on your endeavor with your doctoral work and your area of study. I would just want to speak briefly about we have a resource here at the Parent Child Center of Tulsa called Fatherhood Today. You can look at it on our social media, i.e., Facebook, as well as our webpage. And we can serve our fathers anywhere in the state. We can serve them virtually as well as in person. And we do the 24/7 dad curriculum as well, similar to what they were doing at Strong Dads. Strong Dads were a part of our coalition, Fatherhood Coalition as well. So I just didn't know what was going on with the funding and all that good stuff. But that's all I have to say.
it was called Fatherhood Day. I was trying to look up the link to put for
Oh, I'm
people
sorry.
in
It's
the,
called Fatherhood Today. Let me pull it up and drop it in the chat for you.
that'd be awesome.
And it's through the Parent Child Center of Tulsa. I'm just one of 11 different programs that we have here. And so the Fatherhood Today program is one of the newer programs that we have here. So let me pull this up and then I'm going to drop this link in the chat for anyone who would like to reference us. And let me find the chat. And here we go. It should crop up. Hopefully everyone sees that link. And there it is. Mhm.
Caleb, I wanted to say that you really did a good job. And is it Seiko?
Say cool.
Seiko. I
Mhm.
actually I like your encouraging words too, and what you do is admirable. And I also want to say I can't remember the guy's name who came up and spoke.
Oh,
That
Danny. Danny,
I'm
come on around here.
I'm glad that
He's shy.
I'm glad that something that you heard, Danny, sparked you to get up and say something because it's really encouraging. I know that that takes a lot sometimes, but you never know with what you have to say may spark the next person to be brave and talk as well. So thank you for that.
I thank you guys so much, everyone, for being here. I am just blown away by the information, even though you know it, but just to hear like the facts behind it. And just the amount of courage that I've seen exhibited tonight from people that, chose to share their stories and be vulnerable across all, wow, I'm just blown away. And thank you for sharing and for being vulnerable. And thank you guys for giving up your time and being here. I wanted to say, so much thank you to Caleb and Seiku's group. Seiku's group is actually going to be featured next December for Dads in December.
Oh,
But
26.
yes, and maybe, but again, just thank you guys so much. Happy holidays, and uh, I do have we value your input. I'm going to put that we have a link for the evaluation just of the presentation content that we would appreciate you filling out. And I'm also going to send the link that Seiko you provided out to the group, so that way everybody gets it. And I'm going to stop recording, but again, gosh, thank you guys so much. I'm just wow. That's really all I have to say. Thank you guys so much.